Hello and welcome to a video about Project Grot. In this video, I'm going to give you an overview and talk a bit about what the project is, how it went, what tools we have used, and then generally more about the scene that you will see in a moment. And I will start with the basics of what is this Project Grot that we're announcing with side effects. And what better way to do that than to show you our final result first in Unreal built with Houdini. So Project Growth is a new learning demo for side effects. Before we also had Project Titan or Project Pegasus, where we also built things with Houdini and Unreal to show you how to use procedural tools in game development. And this time we're building a lava cave. So as you've seen from the trailer, we went to a different scene, different environment. We built different tools to show you how different tools are built. So this will also be a new learning demo where everything will be explained in the future. So we will prepare more and more content on this as weeks and months go by. But for now, this is our final result we wanted to share with you, and I will share more about how this goes. So the main idea, the focus of the project was to build a cool cave with a lot of different rocks, cool structures in it, and also some lava that goes into the scene. Now, a little bit more about the team, first of all. So how many people worked on this? And we are only actually 5 people that worked on this. So we have Julian, he is a tech artist at Cloud Imperium Games, and he built a couple of our Houdini tools. We also have Marn, he's also a technical artist, he is working at Electric Square, and he built a few Houdini tools for us as well. We then have Leah, she's a lead art at Frictional Games, and she was generally for our project the artist, also making art direction choices and things like that, making sure to use our tools in a good way and making sure visually our scene looks interesting enough overall. Then we also have our concept artist, Jan, and he is a freelance concept artist, and at the beginning of the project he made a concept for us to help us drive the initial ID phase. And then there is me, Simon. I'm a senior tech artist currently working with Studio Gobo, and I'm sort of like the lead of this project, getting the project together and also building some tooling for the project. Now, talking a bit about the timeline of the project. So we have around 5 people, and how many time or how long did it take to build this? It actually started this year, and I will talk a bit about what happened in each month, basically. So at the end of January, we basically know what type of project we wanted to build. But we still had no references or good final idea what to build. So we added the concept stage. So the last 2 weeks of January, we basically sat together with a concept artist and we were building this concept art. So along that came a lot of sketches, references, things like that. But this is sort of the final output of that stage. Then after that, the most logical thing to do is start making a blockout in Unreal. So this is mainly done in Unreal, and this will be very important for the tooling in Houdini. So a lot of the tools are basically taking the data from the blockout and then generating the detail or assets with that. After a few weeks of work, we basically start to define everything. So we bring in some tools. This is still very rough, so everything is a rough place, but you can see the glimpses of our tools getting in our scene, and we can iterate fast with our tools. And a few weeks later, we then again have most of our tools in there, and we have most of the structure of the scene that we want. And then from there, it's basically a bit more iteration. So our deadline, or our first deadline, was EPC, which is a conference, and we basically wanted to show something really nice at that. So the last few weeks were basically more about art, how to art direct the scene, how to use the tools to change the scene more in terms of what we want it to be, and you can see that there is some variation. Now, a bit more in-depth view on this. So if you look at the concept stage, it started, of course, very simple, like so. So just simple sketches and ideas. So back then, the idea was still quite open. So we had the idea that we wanted to build a cave with a structure in it, with lava in it. So you can see all these thumbnails have that idea behind it. But of course, it's figuring out a bit what exactly is the structure, what exactly is the composition, things like that. And with some more final thumbnailing, I mean, of course, this took a couple days, a week, to get more and more into the iteration phase. So here we can see more something closer to our final result. And from here is basically what we took as what our final roughly should be. Also, the concept artist worked a bit on showing where materials could live. So we have some idea about the different material styles. So we have ideas about like using some crystal scans, for example. So we can use that to win some time instead of making all the materials ourselves. And this is then the concept art as provided to us, to the team, to then start making everything. So you can see it's actually quite detailed. Of course, some parts are a bit more rough. The main important thing for us was just to get an overall feel and sense of what the scene could be. So you can see a lot of the elements here in this concept art is, of course, also very similar to what we have as final. Then we started with this block out, like I mentioned before. So just very simple shapes, blocking out with some basic tooling in Unreal, and then we have a base block out. So from the block out, often we can derive other tools. So we started adding a few tools like the pad tool. You can see in the middle, we have like this pathway with like assets and rocks placed around it. This was a tool that automatically could place these assets. We see some early glimpses of lava and rocks here and there, but again, just very early stage. I mean, we're only like a few weeks or days into this project. Then we start to iterate on this. So you can see our main structure is also now being added. We have some more paths, detail and other details into the scene. And then from here, we are basically doing a rock pass. So our rock tool is now finished. And we basically converted all the blockouts to actual rock meshes rather than simple geometries. And here we have most of the tools a little bit in place. Like there's still a few more tools that we are working on, but most of the tools are here. And then we were basically starting to iterate on the scene a bit. So trying to find a bit better lighting or composition with the tools. We still do change a lot of the rocks and elements in the scene. You will see here that we definitely change things around, but it's also becoming a bit of an artistic version as well, where we basically take the tools that we have and use that to improve the scene. So rather than remodeling all the assets, we basically use the tools to regenerate some rocks or other assets in the scene. So here's another example of that. And then at some point we basically decide like, hey, this ruin structure in the middle, this door ruin, what if we just make it a bit less destroyed and more down? So you can see we just change the whole shape of that structure. And this is a procedural tool, so it easily allows us to make those changes within a few days or even within a few hours, because we can just play around with the tool and find the one that we are the most happiest with. Rather than modeling this by hand, we can just generate a different version to play around with. And then a few more tweaks here and there. And as like I said before, the last couple of weeks are more about art direction, like how can we improve this part, how can we change this part, and it's more playing around with the tools. So by then the tools are roughly in place, and it's more about figuring out where to generate certain assets or where to place our assets. So it's more of an artistic control that we have at the end. And if you're wondering, of course, this is built by Unreal 5 with Houdini, so we did not have the workflow where we had a high poly mesh turn into low poly with baking into normal maps. That workflow was basically not happening at all. We basically have high poly meshes with vertex color applied to it, and then we just use shaders with tileable textures to make sure we have interesting shapes and textures. So we don't have this typical workflow of breaking down elements. Unreal 5 with Nanite was really useful to just simply make a nice rock, high poly rock, for example, and then convert that here into Nanite assets. So our timeline looked a bit like this. So the most tooling cost is of course upfront. At the later stages, we're not really making new tools, or we're not really changing our tools too much. We basically have all the tools set and ready to go. And At the end phase, like I said, it's more of an art, changing direction, trying to find out what scene we're aiming for and playing around with our tools. So easy, everything can easily be changed. We can move the rocks, we can move the lava, we can move other elements, the path, whatever. We can move all these things around to make sure that we have something that we like. A few more details on this production or this project is that overall we had 2 weeks of the pre-production, so the concepting, brainstorming, like all these ideas getting together, figuring out what we want in those pre-production stages, like what is the scene that we want to build. And then we have roughly 10 weeks of production. So this is where we actually sit down in Houdini and Unreal and start to build our tools, start to build a scene in 3D. So that was roughly the time in weeks. But on top of that, actually everyone is basically doing this on the side. So everyone has a main job and doing maybe 1 day a week additionally working on this. If only everyone has 1 day a week, that is not a lot of time. So that makes our time difficult or very packed. So we definitely meet once a week. I mean, working 1 day a week means that there is definitely some progress you can share weekly. We also had a small Discord server where we just communicated with each other, where you can ask questions, we can share pictures. So we have a clear communication channel to sort of like everyone needs to talk to each other and make sure all the tools work together rather than everyone doing its individual thing. So like I said, limited time is here because if everyone works only roughly around 1 day a week, that means that we have to make smart decisions or fast decisions. We cannot lose ourselves in adding very, very tiny small details that you might not see in this big overview. But we do want to make sure all the tools are working and all the tools can generate cool assets or geometries for the scene. And talking a little bit about tools is we have around 9 different tools that we are built for the scene. Let's now go over some of the tool building that we did for the scene. I will now go to our main image. So this is like our main scene that we made. And let's now point with some arrows where we have different tools or where Houdini was used in the scene. Let's start with one that is maybe not super obvious, but it is there, which is all the way at the top. We actually have like a small volume simulation, a pyro simulation. So this is a VDB, and Unreal now supports VDB. So this is a VDB animation that now here plays in the scene. It's a bit subtle, but in a moment you will see a bit more about it. But of course, this is done by Houdini. Then the structure itself, the ruin structure, is also a big tool where it just generates all those details for us and easily can change things around if we want to. Also, the lava in the scene has also been a combination of Houdini and Unreal tools. We wanted to make sure the lava is procedural or dynamic enough. So every time someone would move rocks around, we want to make sure that we can also change the lava with that. So we don't have to bake things down, or we don't have two static assets that only work for one specific area. We want to make sure that it's quite dynamic. We also have the flesh tool. So here in the foreground, you can see some of this flesh structure. This was a tool where you can simply mark an area to be grown as flesh, and then it will spawn these flesh structures. We also have then close to this, which is the bridges tool. This basically connects the pathway to the side rocks. It will sort of like create these spikes. Then we also have the pathway tool. So from the blockout, we spawn all these assets on the pathway to make it look interesting. We also have a tool which I call the Rockify. We plug in an asset and the tool gives us a rockified version. It's more in terms of creating statues, because in the scene we have a couple statues. So we don't want to add too much rock noise on a human or on a statue, because otherwise you will lose the human shape or the readability that it's a human. So this tool is like a very subtle tool that applies very specific rock shapes here and there. In a moment you will see more about that. And of course, we have our rocks as well. So all the rocks in the scene are procedurally generated. We have a couple tools for making these interesting rocks. In a moment, I will share more about this. And also the last one is rock connection tools. This is a small tool, a very simple small tool that allows us to blend and connect different rocks together. So you can see here that we have like these quite unique shapes, and we call them rock connections. Now, to go a bit more in detail on each tool is, for example, here on that ruin structure that we had, So we input a blockout shape, something very simple, could be a cube. We fracture that cube, and then we apply sort of like flash-like shape. So fracturing means that we will add the destruction, we will remove and feel like it's been destroyed. And then the flash shape will make sure it sort of like blends a bit nicely together. So here is a image of that. So here, this could be the blockout, and we can also, for example, paint where we want to have damage. So with the vertex color, for example, we can mark an area where we'd like to see some damage happening, or where most of the damage should be. After the processing is done, it could look like this. So you can see that the damage is definitely around that red area, and we do like a lot of like the fracturing and detailing in that part, and everything else is just like a vertex color to work with the shader. So that's why the color looks like this, because it's mainly used in vertex color for renewal. And here is a small video of the process. So you can see we apply vertex color, we destroy that area, we add the flash, we add some more detail, and then we add vertex color. So that's roughly how the process was for this element. So we do a simple fracture setup, and from there we then spawn additional details and details on top of it to make sure that it looks good. So this is then what the ruins look like in the final image. So you can see there's a really nice, interesting structure with a lot of detail in it. Now, if you look back at how the process went, and this is why proceduralism is actually really interesting, is it allows us for so many iterations. So these are like a couple of weeks in between, and you can see that every time it changes its shape. So the first tool, I mean, on the left image is like the first version, or like one of the earliest version. You can see it's not really defined. We are chunking away some details and adding some of these structures in it. But after that, we are basically now having a tool where we can easily change elements. So as the tool progresses and as our art direction progresses, we basically are changing this version. So we are putting in different values into this tool until we're happy with this. So you can see like the two lost versions are only maybe a few days of like different work in here. But you can see the difference it makes to the scene is a lot. So we can quickly use this tool to like really define what we want. Do we want to have a very large damage area, or do we want to like focus it more on specific parts? So that's again why I like procedural tools, is because we have this iteration now. We can always go back and forward by just having these sliders. So it would be a very tedious job if we would go back to a 3D modeling package and model this ourselves, because it would take a lot of time to do all this by hand, by modeling all these the damage detail, these fractured details. It would take a while to get all that detail in there. Then also the flash tool. So additionally, on top of this ruin, we also wanted to control those flash structures. We call them flash structures. So based on the curve, we can draw a line, and around the line, we will spawn some of these flash lines. So we will scatter some stones, and we will try to do some scattering of these flashes as well. So for example, let's say we draw a line. So in the middle, we draw our line, and then the gray area is, for example, the world, so the collision. We can spawn stones on the line. So we have these two big green stones. And then we can, for example, sample a couple points on the collision or on the scene. And then we will spawn a connection between the stones and the scene. And then we have roughly something like this. So again, this is more art controlled. This is someone drawing, or a user drawing the line where they want this to be. And here is also a small video on that. So we have our input, we scatter points on this, we also measure the distance, and then we mask away based on distance. From there, we can create the lines between the points, smooth them out, and then make nice really curves to then have the geometry swept on it. So that's roughly how that process went. And there are different ways of how we can use this tool, but basically again, is we want to control where we want to have these structures. And this is then how it looked like here in the final scene. So we did not went that crazy in the amount of it, but a lot of these elements are again placed by tools. Then coming into rocks. So a lot of the rocks in the scene are done by some procedural tooling. We input a basic blockout. So again, blockouts are important for us because we will use it through many different tools. We calculate the directionality in the blockout, and then we are going to scatter and break up the shape. From there, we're going to display some more details into it as well to make sure the rock looks really nice and detailed. So a blockout could look like this. This could be a blockout for a rock. This is a nice detailed blockout. It has nice, interesting shapes to work with. So first of all is calculating a directionality. So from the bottom to the top, we try to find some ways of how the rocks could be driven or having certain directionality in there. So we have all these little points now with a vector saying where the noise or where the shape should grow or go into. So if we scatter around elements, we can, for example, scatter these bigger chunks to break up the shape, but we can also use the directionality to make sure those shapes that we scatter follow that direction. So that way we have like sort of like a natural flow in this rock. So it's not like too static or too random. We actually have a certain flow in the rock itself. After that, we do a bunch of like meshing and vertex color passing and so on. So we do apply a lot of data into this. And then we have a result like this in game. So you can see we have a really nice, interesting rock. We have close to our block out, but we're still breaking up the shapes into nicer chunks. And definitely you can see the directionality in here. So if you look closely enough, you can definitely see that there is some directionality in these rocks, in the texturing or in the noising, where everything has that specific way of adding the details into it. This is sort of roughly how our rocks were made by this tool. Then we have what we call the rock connection tools. This is a very simple tool that we quickly made to have this connection bridge, sort of. This was also coming from the concept art, and we also wanted to create that feeling in our final image. So from a curve, we can randomly create connections. The way the tool is built is we just draw a simple curve like this, and then we use sample a couple points on the curve and give them a random up or down facing area. So we can then raycast against the collision of the worlds, so in this case these cubes, and this is then roughly how the main shapes of those connections will be. We add a couple noises on top of this to make it a little bit more organic. And this is then what a shape could look like. The only thing left is to actually add some geometry. So we add a very simple geometry shapes here. And this is then what we used for the final. So you can see here are some of these rock connections. And this again helps us to really just blend some interesting shapes into rocks or blend different rocks a bit together with these shapes. Then we also have the Rockify tool. We input a 3D scan of someone, and then we're going to project height data or height map data on it. We're going to display some elements, and we're also going to scatter around some rocks. This has been used to make those statues in the scene. So on the left here is we have a 3D scan of someone, and on the right is basically a output that we process. So we of course apply vertex colors to work with the shaders in Unreal, but basically this is how it will look like. So we don't want to break the shape too much. We apply like certain specific noises on the shape. So we have like, for example, 3 different height maps that we have. So on the back of the person, we apply like small rocky noise to break up the back of the person. In the middle of the person or specific areas of the person, we apply a very subtle rock, generic rock shapes. And then coming closer to the bottom, we apply like this porous type rock shape. So these are coming from Quixel scans. So we can have this interesting shape at the bottom, and it also works to blend with the environment a bit. We can also here, if I go back, you can see we're also scattering rocks at the bottom as well. And then this is then used to create all these characters basically. So all these characters or all these scans were then converted into 2D meshes with this tool. Then we have the pathway tool. This is again coming from the blockout. So we get a blockout where we want to have the path, and then we're going to get the top surface and scatter meshes procedurally along that surface. So here on the left is basically the blockout of the pathway. So we can have this quite specific direction and shape. And then we're gonna on the right here is the output, which is a bunch of points that we scatter. So basically this is a quite common concept which is called instancing. So we calculate a point cloud, so a bunch of points, and each point is represented by a model. So in Game Engine, or what Houdini will do, Houdini will send the points to Unreal, and Unreal understands the points and will instance meshes on the points. For example, every point in the middle of this area will be a flat rock. So I choose this flat rock because I want the middle of the path to be quite flat. I don't want to have too much detail, otherwise the pathway will look very broken. You need it to be a bit flat. Then on the side or the border of this pathway, I decided to create a quite more unique rock. So there is a bit more variation around the border. So this one has a bit more height variation in different shapes. So it's not that flat. And then this will make sure we have a nice pad with some subtle details in the middle and some more interesting shapes around the border. To finish it off, we also need to have some type of cliff shape. So I copied this cliff mesh along this pathway to make sure it's like a nice closed cliff with a top pad on it. And then this is what it looks like in Unreal. Of course, I'm here only showing 3 different models, but in the end, we're of course scattering more models. We have a few more models from Quixel, for example, or models that we made ourselves to scatter around the pad. So we're adding these variations here on the pad to have a nice combinations between different shapes, so big rocks, small rocks, rock shapes, porous shapes. So we have a few variations here and there. So we're actually making these nice pathway shapes. Then we come to the bridges. This is done by a curve as well. So this connection between the pathway and the side rocks. So we spawn models along a spline basically. So again, not the most complicated tool that we've built, but basically on the left is you draw a spline or a curve, and on the right it will generate a model like that. So what I basically did here as well is I wanted to create like a fake collision wall. So when you draw the curve, it will generate this fake blue collision wall, and this will basically be used for snapping. We can, of course, get the collision of the scene, but that sometimes can be heavy. If you draw a long line or a very big line, that means that we need to get more and more collision objects. So I decided to make this fake collision wall, which is quite simply generated in Houdini to snap to. So this makes sure all the points have like a snapping area, so they're not too randomly in the world. So the green line is what you draw, the orange line is what is generated from the green line, and then the orange line controls where all the meshes will be copied against to. And then we have a result like this. And then another thing is, of course, the VDB simulation that we did. So there are a few areas in the scene where we use this volume simulation. This is done by Houdini, by the Pyro tools, the Pyro subs. And then we can use the new Unreal VDB importer to easily import the files. So there is no magical conversion of textures that we need to do in Houdini. We just can drag and drop the VDB files into Unreal. So older workflows would involve using like spreadsheets or a volume texture or all the elements. So these things would be all generated and set up by you. But now with the new VDB importer, it's very easy to just drag and drop the VDB directly into Unreal. So this is the most simple setup you can have. This is coming from a preset, the Billowy Smokes. So we basically have a base shape of how the volume needs to emit from. This could be like a cube or a torus or something. And then we spawn a pyro source. This will basically initialize basic values, like a temperature or a density. And then we apply additional velocity. And from there, we also need to apply the volume. So we need to convert this into a volume, and then we have the solver node, so the pyro solver, which actually does the calculation of this simulation. So once that is done, we can have a basic simulation like this. So this is using very basic settings and fine-tuning a few elements here and there to make sure it's nicer like we want it to be. So this is roughly what we have then. This is a small video, but before I play the video, there are 3 important notes here. So we make it loopable. Often for games, we want to make sure things are loopable. So we only are calculating, let's say 30 frames, and then we loop the same 30 frames over and over and over. So you have to make sure that the last frames and the first frames are nicely blending with each other. So it doesn't feel like it's resetting. It's just a nice, consistent loop animation. So there is the Node Labs make loop tool for this. Then we need to make sure it's converted into a VDB because we want to save or we want to cache the file as a VDB. So the VDB is the file format that can now be imported into Unreal. So you want to make sure it's a VDB so we can import this in a moment and in Unreal. And here is the video of that smoke. So this is a nice loopable smoke animation that we have. So in Houdini it looks really cool, it looks really nice. And then in Unreal looks like this. So, of course, we had to tone down the volume or the density a lot because we don't want to have this super thick smoke coming from the ceiling. We want it to be very subtle. So, of course, some of the detailing that we had in Houdini is like very subtle because, again, we literally lowered down the density So in Houdini, if I go back, we have this nice thick smoke, but in Unreal, it's a little bit less because the density is like turned down a lot because we want it to be subtle. And let's now go over to lava. So some of the lava was done with Unreal, some of the lava was done with more Houdini, and I will talk a bit about how some of it is done with Houdini with simulation tools. So we wanted to sort of do some type of simulation and store the data in like a flow map. And that's exactly what we did. So we have a nanite mesh, and on the vertex color, we can actually store some flow data. So we can actually have a nice dense mesh and use that vertex color to drive some texture flow in there. So one of the first things that I've done to make this happen is we grab the full block out of the scene, and this is then used in the simulation to get the lava in the scene so it can collide with the actual scene block out. I projected this into a height field like this, and this is like a very basic projection, and I applied some little details on top of this. Of course, I was not happy with this result, so I need to iterate a bit more on it. So I added more noise, I added more shape-wise where everything is, and I marked with the red mask from the blockout again where the lava should be. So this is the area of the lava, and this will now be used in a simulation. So we're going to use one of the height field simulation nodes, and in here, if I play the animation, we will apply this effect of simulating water through this area. And you can see it feels very convincing shape-wise to get something a bit more organic in terms of lava shapes. So this looks really, really interesting, and this is exactly what we've used for the final result. So the final result could look like this. So we still have that terrain, but we now have these really interesting lava chunks now. So you can see the color on it is really cool. So we have a nice combination between different shapes and chunks in here. And this is, of course, what I wanted to now have in game. There are a few ways to now import this. We can try to stay as height field, import as height field data and so on. But I decided to just grab the lava mesh and export this as a mesh and nanite mesh. We also apply very specific data on the vertex color. So there is like the directionality or the flow is stored in the vertex color, but also other data like some of the color information and other information is stored on the vertex color. So we can always reference this back in the shader. And then we have something like this. So we have our lava that looks like this in the scene. We can always see it in the trailer as well, where we have the lava flowing down in the scene. And this is sort of coming from that simulation on the height field to get some certain direction and shaping of the lava. And then let's finish off here with a nice summary. So for us, it was important to define at the beginning really well what we wanted. Of course, there was some room left to have some creativity at the end. But basically, we wanted to, from the beginning, establish what tools we want to build. So the lava, the rocks, the cave, like there was, of course, a good understanding of what type of tools we wanted to build at the beginning. We also wanted to make sure we have enough references, concepting, and just overall a good idea what the scene could be. So I think that concepting stage that we've done in the beginning was just helpful to us to build the scene along the way as the weeks went by. Then for me, it's always important to get the tools in as fast as we can. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just need the tools to be in there so we can start giving feedback, start iterating on this. It's very important to us, especially if we don't have much time, is we just want to, as fast as possible, get something working in Unreal to just see the first glimpses of the tool working. Then tools don't have to be complicated. Like some of these tools are not that complicated, or they have not been fleshed out into like super detailed fancy tools. So some of the bridges and connection tools that I've showed are very simple. You just draw a curve and it spawns a mesh on the curve or something. So this gives us, in the bigger picture, gives us a strong silhouette of the shape, and themselves are quite simple geometries. But it gives us a really nice feeling in the scene. Even though the tool is quite simple, it really helps to define the scene better. And of course, the last thing that I want to mention is the team. So we had a really great team. We were a small team of 5 people, but we were able to build this scene quite nicely in a very limited amount of time, like I mentioned before. So we only had like 1 day a week, 10 weeks to build a scene. And I think we did really well, and our output is really nice from what we've built with Houdini and Unreal. And of course, more to come. So I hope we will be able to create more tutorials on this. So we will flesh out the tools. So here, this is an overview. I had not had the time to go into more details, but I hope in the future we can provide a more open, in-depth tutorials on some of these tooling, so you can actually understand how some of these exactly work. And that was it for this overview. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you will like the tutorials that are coming soon. Thank you.